If you're active on social media, you are probably chronically depressed, have at some stage pondered whether or not the moon is real, and Mark Zuckerberg knows exactly where you are, and exactly what you're doing, at any given time. You have also probably heard of Will Still, whether you follow French football or not, the 30-year-old Belgian manager with English parents, who is making waves in France right now at Stade de Reims. If you have heard of Still, then you most likely know a few key facts about him, such as that he is the youngest manager in Europe's Big Five leagues, his side have gone 19 league games unbeaten to date, he used to play Football Manager obsessively, and that Ron have to pay a fine of €25,000 for every match in which he manages the club, because Still doesn't yet have a UEFA Pro license, which is required in Ligue 1. In fact, those 4 facts about Still, typically shared in bullet point form, something a little bit like this, and then retweeted several thousand times, have become so prolific on almost all football-related social media accounts that they are now frequently being parodied and people are muting the words "Will Still" from appearing on their timeline. Though, presumably only the combination of the two in that order, otherwise you are going to exclude quite a lot of tweets. For that reason, I did wonder whether people might already be sick of hearing about Will Still, but after looking into the rise of Will Still, and the job that Will Still is currently doing, both of which are remarkable, I said to myself, do you know what? I will still make a video about Will Still. I'm sorry, that was dreadful. But please do sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the city of Rennes, which lies equidistant between Paris and Luxembourg, as we take a far deeper look than just a few bullet points at a manager, virtually without precedent, and certainly without peer in the European game right now, and explore the job that he's doing, how he got there at such a young age, and what the future might hold for a manager who already seems to have his eyes set on the Premier League. The first thing you notice about Will Still, if you listen to him being interviewed, watch him going about the day-to-day business of his job, or read anything that he has written, is that he is a football obsessive. I have seen it said of Pep Guardiola that he is physically incapable, or mentally incapable I suppose, of going more than 3 minutes without thinking about football. Guardiola once said that football is evolution, and he has long been transfixed with the idea of leaving no stone unturned, knowing everything that there is to know about the opposition, and thinking of new ideas of how to make his own team more effective in every game. Guardiola is sometimes accused of overthinking things, especially in big European games, and of needlessly changing a winning formula, but one could hardly argue with his record overall. It seems intellectually lazy just to compare Still with a man who many consider to be the best manager in the world, but he certainly appears to have a similarly obsessive relationship with the sport, and to spend almost every waking minute thinking about it. It's an intensity that can become all-consuming. Guardiola, for example, felt as though it had all become too much following 4 extraordinarily successful seasons at Barcelona, leaving the club that is closest to his heart in order to take a year-long sabbatical in New York. Still has only been the first-team boss at Rennes for 5 months, and when Guardiola was his age, he had just left Barcelona to join Brescia, and would play professionally for another 5 years before finally retiring. Burnout shouldn't yet be a factor then, and at this stage, Still's intensity has only heralded positive results. Without wanting to labour what is only a tenuous comparison at best, whilst Guardiola attributes his early understanding of the game to playing under Johan Cruyff at the Camp Nou, Still's came from the video game Football Manager. Much has been made of Still's love affair with the game, and it is a slightly embellished and misunderstood link. In one interview that Still had with TalkSport, that ever-brilliant radio station, Andy Goldstein and Darren Bent seemed to be of the opinion that Still was offered the top job at Rennes solely off the back of his achievements playing Football Manager, as though a top-flight football club in one of Europe's biggest leagues was just scouting around for anyone who had taken Woking from the Conference to the Premier League on FM, whittling their shortlist down to Still and Jay off the in-betweeners. Presumably, they also hired their head physio because he was really good at Project Hospital on the PC, and their groundsman because he'd mastered Lawn Mowing Simulator, the Landmark Edition, on the PlayStation 4. Surprisingly, that isn't what actually happened. Still did play a lot of Football Manager when he was younger, along with his brother, partly, he says, because they weren't allowed a PlayStation. Still would start most saves managing West Ham, the club that he grew up supporting, particularly on Football Manager 2012, which still played to death, in which the Hammers had the biggest budget in the Championship. On later editions, after West Ham had returned to the Premier League, Still liked to start out at the likes of Leicester City, Fulham, and basically any Championship team that had a big transfer budget. He is yet to manage a team in those circumstances in real life. Still admits that playing Football Manager probably gave him some of the groundwork to go into management and coaching, praising the accuracy of the game since he has done so, but it wasn't as though he took West Ham to the Champions League final at 15 and suddenly had an epiphany that management was his calling. The reason Still played Football Manager in the first place, unsurprisingly, is because he was a football fan, and he also played football in real life. At that age, he still had aspirations of making it as a player. Though both of his parents are English, Still had a uniquely Belgian upbringing. For those of you who don't know, Belgium has 3 distinct regions. Flanders, in the north, which is primarily Dutch-speaking, Wallonia in the south, which is primarily French-speaking, and the Brussels capital region, which is an enclave within Flanders but right on the border of Wallonia, which is officially bilingual, with both French and Dutch or Flemish sharing equal status. Still was born and grew up here in the municipality of Braine-l'Alleud, which is technically in Wallonia, but sits right on the edge of Flanders and just 12 miles south of Brussels. Still spoke French at school and Dutch at football training, so close was the divide, and of course English at home with his parents. Consequently, he has always been effortlessly multilingual, equally comfortable in all 3 languages, something which has been of immense benefit to him since moving into coaching, and particularly at Rennes. Some of you will have seen the clips of Still coaching at Rennes, switching instantly from French to English and then back again, in perfect dialect, without any hint of the accents bleeding into one another, something which seems incredibly alien to a horrifically monolingual English audience, and even to the typically much more competent but reluctantly bilingual or multilingual French. A capable but far from outstanding youngster, Still spent time in the Mons and Sint-Truiden youth ranks, whilst both played in the second tier of Belgian football, along with a handful of other lower league sides. At the age of 18, with a burgeoning and lucrative career in the game, not exactly seemingly on the horizon, by that stage contracted to a team in the 4th division of Belgian football, Still applied for a college degree in England. He was accepted by Myerscough College in Lancashire, where he represented the college at football, but also had the realisation that there was so much more that he could do within the sport if, as he already suspected, he wasn't quite cut out to make it as a player. With that in mind, Still did an apprenticeship at nearby Preston North End, getting a further feel for working in football in a non-playing capacity, and when he completed his degree and left college in 2014, his mind was made up. Still had enjoyed his first taste of coaching in the youth ranks at Preston, but only aged 21 and now back in Belgium, and with no experience outside of an internship as the assistant manager of the under-14s at Preston whilst they were a League One club, he could hardly afford to be picky when it came to his first club and role. Still wrote letters and applied for opportunities, he says, at more than 20 different clubs in Belgium, all of whom responded to say thanks but no thanks, until Yannick Ferreira invited him for an interview. Ferreira was the manager of Sint-Truiden, whose youth ranks Still had briefly belonged to, and it probably helped matters that he too was a very young coach. Like Still, Ferreira never played football professionally, but he was appointed as the head coach of the Anderlecht youth team when he was just 23 years old. He was still only 33 when Still contacted him at Sint-Truiden as a 21-year-old, and it seems improbable that many other coaches or managers would have been willing to give him the time of day. In football, as in almost all walks of life, timing and fortune can be all important. Ferreira didn't offer Still a job on the spot, but merely an opportunity to prove his worth. He asked Still if he could film and edit a game. Still said yes, so Ferreira sent him to film Sint-Truiden's upcoming opponents, to edit the footage, provide him with feedback, and offer any analysis that he felt might be helpful. It is worth noting at this stage that Sint-Truiden were a second-tier side at the time, before they were taken over by Japanese tech and e-commerce giants DMM.com in 2017, and became a competitive top-flight side. These days, Sint-Truiden sit pretty mid-table in the Belgian Pro League, and employ senior Japanese internationals like Daniel Schmidt, Premier League title winner Shinji Okazaki, and until recently, Shinji Kagawa as well, but Still was walking into a very different club with a very differently sized budget. Well aware that this was still a unique opportunity though, Still recorded the game and watched it back, then rewatched it, obsessively, time and time again, scribbling down notes until there was barely a pass or throw-in which he hadn't pored over with a fine-tooth comb and analysed within an inch of its life. He proceeded to take pages of notes to Ferreira to accompany the footage that he'd shot, who was shocked and a little bit bemused at the depth that Still had gone into, but nonetheless impressed, and offered him a recurring role as an unpaid video analyst. It's hard to know how much of it was down to Still at this stage, given that he was a very junior member of staff, but Sint-Truiden lost just 3 games that season, comfortably winning the Belgian second division title and securing promotion. With that, Ferreira was offered a job at Stade de Reims, one of the 3 biggest clubs in Belgian football, and clearly valuing the work that Still had done, Ferreira took him with him, still officially at this stage, just as a video analyst. Standard won the Belgian Cup that season, but a 7th place finish in the league was considered a major disappointment, and both Ferreira and Still lost their jobs at the end of the season. Still only 23 years old at this point, it is worth bearing in mind, Still's CV might only have said video analyst on it, but in his season at Standard, he had taken on the role almost of Ferreira's assistant, tasked with taking certain training sessions, coming up with new set-piece routines, and running his own individual drills. These were all new tools that Still was adding to his ever-growing arsenal at an incredibly young age, and above all else, he was loving every aspect of it. There aren't all that many managers at the highest level who still take charge of training sessions, some aren't even present at them at all, and there is a handful who barely see their players other than on a Saturday afternoon. Still isn't one of those coaches. He is extremely hands-on, he loves being out on the training pitch, and he's constantly thinking of new drills, routines, and training exercises to improve his team, their fitness, and their morale heading into the next game. The following season, Still officially became an assistant head coach for the first time, dropping back down into the second tier of Belgian football to become Frederik van der Beest's deputy at Liège. Just a couple of months later, Van der Beest was sacked, and the club's management asked Still to step up to the top job on a caretaker basis. Still told them that he didn't think that it was right, given that there were much more experienced members of staff at the club, before being told essentially that it wasn't a question, they wanted him to do it, and no one else. Still won 21 points out of a possible 27 over the remainder of the season, though that didn't prevent Liège from being declared bankrupt at the end of the campaign, at which point he was asked to stay on at Liège, but to drop down to being an assistant once again, whilst the club looked for a new head coach. Still declined, citing the different relationship dynamic that he now had with the club's players, but also surely somewhat irked at not having been offered the top job despite his very impressive record. Still must also have been well aware that his reputation in Belgian football was on the rise, and after turning down Liège's offer to stay on as an assistant, he was offered the same job but as assistant to Stijn Veerven at Beerschot, who had just won promotion to the Belgian Pro League. After 2.5 years at Beerschot, Veereveen's replacement, Hernan Losada, departed mid-season to take over at DC United in the MLS, and still was once again offered a caretaker role. Despite guiding Beerschot to a 9th place finish, and earning an impressive draw away at Club Brugge during that time, Beerschot didn't offer Still the job on a permanent basis. A victim of his age and inexperience perhaps, Still was yet to turn 29, and Beerschot opted for the much more experienced and safer option, at least as they saw it, in Peter Myers instead. They finished bottom of the league the following season, miles behind everyone else, and Myers lost his job. Maybe they should have stuck with a 28-year-old kid. It was a blessing in disguise in some respects for Still though, who landed his biggest job yet as Oscar Garcia's assistant at Stade de Reims. It came as a shock to Still, who figured that no one outside of Belgium would have any idea who he was, to discover that Rom had been tracking his progress for the past couple of years, and had even watched some of his training sessions in Belgium. Rom didn't want Still to focus on video analysis anymore. They wanted him out on the training ground, leading sessions, and talking to the players one-on-one. However, just a couple of months into the season, Still returned to Belgium. Working towards his UEFA A licence based in Belgium at the time, the commute from Rom wasn't particularly practical, and he had plenty of offers from back home. One of those came from Manchester City legend Vincent Kompany, now of Championship tabletoppers Burnley but managing Anderlecht at the time, but Still turned Kompany down in order to return to Standard Liège, feeling as though he still had unfinished business there, the only club that he had yet left not of his own consent. During his brief stint at Reims, Still took charge of the team when Oscar Garcia was suspended against PSG of all teams. It wasn't just any old game against PSG either. It was Lionel Messi's debut. Kylian Mbappe scored twice in a 2-0 win for the away side, but it was a first taste of the big time for Still, who could be forgiven for having pinched himself at setting a team up against Messi, Neymar and Mbappe at the age of 28. Indeed, Mbappe is the only member of PSG's famed front three who is actually younger than Still. Still's season back at Standard was a pretty catastrophic one for the club, who had just sacked Mbaile and replaced him with Luca Elsner when he arrived, as they slumped to a 14th place finish, and at the end of the season, having obtained his A licence, he returned to Reims. Taking to his Instagram account, which at that time only had a couple of thousand followers, Still told Standard fans, "It's not goodbye, just a see you soon." That's certainly what it was for Reims, who had gone on to finish 12th in Ligue 1 the previous season, after Still had left. Oscar Garcia knew that his job was about to become much more difficult though, as promising youngster El Bilal Touré, young centre-back Wout Faes, and their star man and top scorer Hugo Ekitike all departed in big money moves to Almeria, Leicester City and PSG. Sure enough, Reims made a horrible start to the season, winning just one of their opening 10 games, and Garcia was promptly sacked. One suspects, given the way in which Still was monitored and then brought to Reims by the club themselves, and not at the behest of Garcia, that whilst they probably didn't plan on making that move quite so soon, Ron always viewed Still as a potential head coach. When Garcia lost his job in mid-October, Reims offered Still his job, initially just until the World Cup, which would have been less than a month. Reims went unbeaten in Still's 5 games in charge of the club during that time though, and for the first time in his career, he was offered a job as a permanent head coach. Reims are footballing royalty in France. The first French club to win 6 Ligue 1 titles, all of which were won between 1949 and 1962. Reims also reached the final of the European Cup in 1956 and 1959, losing to Real Madrid on both occasions. However, Reims haven't won anything of note, or at least no major trophy, since their last Ligue 1 title in 1962. They played second-tier football as recently as the 2017-18 season, and third-tier football as recently as the 2009-10 campaign. Owner Jean-Pierre Caillot has been involved with the club since 1993, becoming vice president in 2001 and president in 2004. Whilst Reims' form on the pitch has been very much up and down during that time, Caillot has managed to maintain a level of relative financial stability that few other French clubs have enjoyed. Following those significant summer departures, Reims made Junior Ito their marquee signing for a fee of €10 million. Given that Ito was brought in from Genk, in Belgium, it is hard to imagine that Still, whilst he wasn't yet head coach at that time, didn't have something to do with the deal. A late bloomer, only brought to Europe from Japan by Genk at the age of 26, Ito is now 30, but he still seems to be getting better and better with every game. Quick, skillful, clever and direct, Ito is probably the most eye-catching player in this Reims team, operating typically on the right flank in a 4-2-3-1, and he has chipped in with 5 goals and 5 assists so far this season, and still absolutely adores him. It is another summer rival though, Folarin Balogun, who has taken most of the headlines. Having scored just 3 goals in 20 games on loan at Middlesbrough last season, only Jonathan David and Kylian Mbappe have scored more goals than him in Ligue 1 so far this season. He has struck 17 times in 28 games for Reims in total, and there are already discussions underway at Arsenal as to whether they should cash in on him or look to bring him into Mikel Arteta's first team ahead of next season. Reims were scoring goals even during their poor form under Garcia though. It is defensively where Still has really turned the club around. During his 19 games in charge, Reims have kept a quite incredible 11 clean sheets, and they haven't conceded a single goal in any of their last 6 games. It is a remarkable record, and a fine testament to the work that Still has done behind the scenes. The essence of coaching and of management, if you like, is to simply maximise the talents of your own team, whilst exploiting the weaknesses of your opponents. And Still, thus far at least, has done an outstanding job of both. Tactically pragmatic, unlike a lot of younger coaches who are fixated on playing a certain style of football or with certain patterns, Still isn't at all afraid to mix things up a bit, go long, and be more direct when it suits, but also whilst devising traps for the opposition to fall into, cute patterns of play, and clever set-piece routines. In addition to obsessing over the details, finding little ways in which to undo the opposition, and putting all of that into practice with his own sessions on the training ground, Still doesn't overlook the personal side of management. He spends a lot of time with his players, far more than most modern managers, and he enjoys a close relationship with a lot of them. Still has talked of the importance of relating to his players on a human level, something which is no doubt made much easier when you are able to converse so freely and fluently with them all, and when you're actually not that much different in age from them. Commanding respect is often considered to be a challenge or an obstacle for younger managers, but there are few big egos in the Reims dressing room. Reims have the youngest average age of any squad in Ligue 1, at bang on 24, with just 3 Reims players being older than Still himself, including 42-year-old backup goalkeeper Nicolas Penatou, who brings that average age up quite a bit on his own there, and 35-year-old club captain Younes Abdelhamid, who has been outstanding this season and might actually have helped Morocco had they taken him to the World Cup, given the problems that they had at centre-back in the latter stages of the tournament. Still has taken a team that was embroiled in a relegation scrap, made them really hard to beat, well, impossible as of yet, put in place the building blocks upon which they have built, and instilled an enormous sense of belief in their individual and collective talents that they can go out there and beat anyone. To go 19 games unbeaten and 6 games without conceding, including victory last weekend away at Monaco, would be remarkable for any coach, even an experienced one at PSG say, let alone a 30-year-old at Reims. It's little wonder, therefore, that Reims have been willing to swallow a cost of €25,000 a game until he does obtain his UEFA Pro licence, which he is in the process of doing now. It is somewhat ironic that the manager, in the best form in any of Europe's top 5 leagues right now, also happens to be the least qualified, and the Reims are looking to get their fines from Ligue 1 forgiven on the basis that Stille is trying to obtain the pro licence as quickly as possible. The only issue is that he's so young, and the fines now have been stopped since he is qualifying for his pro licence. Despite being so young and not yet having had a full season anywhere as a head coach, the spotlight on Stille is already enormous, not least here in England, given his perfect English and the fact that both of his parents are from here. Stille has already made no secret of his ambition to manage in the Premier League, something that would have seemed like a pipe dream as recently as 5 months ago, and laughable, quite frankly, a decade ago, when he was at college in Lancashire and working as an intern with Preston North End's under-14 team. It is still somewhat surreal that someone who has this resume pinned to the top of their LinkedIn page, which he appears to have made himself, is being linked with a move to the Premier League. It is hard to imagine Pep Guardiola or Antonio Conte putting together a similar graphic on Paint and sharing it to one of their social media accounts. Stille is a West Ham fan, which means that links to West Ham are inevitable, especially off the back of such a disappointing season for the Hammers, and with many surprised that David Moyes has hung on for this long. Longer term, there may already be those starting to think about the England job. There has long been a debate in England about whether the Three Lions should have an English or a foreign manager. Stille would be the latter, but whilst feeling like the former to most people. At this point, you've probably gathered that Stille didn't just reach the Premier League with Scunthorpe United on Football Manager and get offered the job at Reims. What actually happened is that he mentioned playing Football Manager when he was younger in an interview with the Daily Mirror that was picked up on by Sports Interactive themselves, who then sponsored an interview that the coach's voice did with Stille, which subsequently put a lot of emphasis on him playing Football Manager. You know, because it was a sponsored interview. That has now been tied to him, irrevocably one would imagine, though the novelty comes largely from the fact that he is a manager young enough to have grown up playing Football Manager. Given the popularity of the game, there will come a stage at which that is not remarkable, and most, or at least a significant minority of actual football managers will have at some stage played Football Manager. The idea that he just went from being sat on his sofa in his boxers at 3 AM smashing the spacebar, and suddenly a Ligue 1 team came calling and offered him a job, is a compelling one though, I will admit, so who am I to spoil it with something as tedious as reality? What Stille has done prior to joining Reims, but particularly this season, is nothing short of remarkable. I doubt that there is a super club in Europe that isn't watching on with serious interest, but it is also a sample size of just 19 games. Those games couldn't have gone much better for Stade de Reims though, who are now within 4 points of the European places in Ligue 1, ahead of one of their toughest tests yet, up against Marseille tomorrow evening. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed both to this channel and also my backup channel, both of which should be on your screens now, and also turn on notifications if, well, you'd ever like to know when I've uploaded a video. You can also follow me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.